Hello, this is Professor Philip C. Graves. Today we're going to go through a lesson on modeling real estate decisions. This particular lesson covers a technique called optimization. We're going to do a very basic optimization here, and we're going to use a visual approach to arriving at a solution rather than a mathematical approach. So this is designed to really just introduce you to the concepts and teach you a little bit about using a tool like Excel to make some basic real estate decisions. Again, this is a very almost oversimplified model, but hopefully it will give you some advanced techniques in using Excel and give you some thoughts on how to model some real estate decisions. So in this situation we're going to look at a real estate apartment complex, and we are going to take a look at the interaction between rent levels, maintenance in the apartment complex, and what those do to vacancy, and we're going to solve for the highest profit that we can make in this complex. And we could estimate mathematical relationships between these variables such that there is some sort of linear or curvilinear relationship between rents, say, and vacancy, or some curve relationship between maintenance levels and vacancy. Obviously, if maintenance expenditures go down, you would expect your vacancy to rise as the place begins to look shabby or the trash is not taken out, and vice versa. If rents go up, you would expect vacancy to go up. So we have perhaps a positive relationship between vacancy and rent, and a negative relationship between the expenditures on maintenance in a complex and the vacancy. So let's take a look at that and how we would model that in Excel, and ultimately try to find that perfect balance between the expenditures on maintenance and the rent levels to get the maximum profit out of a building. So let's begin. So if we open up, we're going to use Microsoft Excel, which is a pretty decent program to use for these types of decisions. There are obviously other more sophisticated programs that would allow you to do it also, but this one works pretty good for our purposes. So where should we begin? We'll go ahead and give our spreadsheet a title so we know what we're doing here. We'll call it rent versus maintenance. And let's model, in this situation, a small apartment complex with only 12 units. And let's say that we'll just set our base rent for now at, let's say, $500. And we'll go ahead and use the dollar symbol here. That way Excel will go ahead and format that for us in dollars. And let's say that our maintenance level, let's set that at, say, $40,000. And let's say that's maybe one salaried person that we've got on staff that can unclog your toilet or take the trash out. And what we want to solve for here is our vacancy rate and ultimately our profit level. So how are we going to model these guys? Well, in a very simplistic sense, our profit calculation is pretty straightforward. It's going to be our units times our rent, and this is our monthly rent, so we'll multiply that by 12. And we'll have to take away our vacancy, and then we're also going to have to subtract out our maintenance expenses. So for this situation, let's say that our vacancy is 10%, and let's just do that calculation. So we'll say equals, and we'll say 12 units times $500 times 12 months, and then we're going to multiply that by 1 minus our vacancy rate, which in this one will give us 90%. And then we also, at the end here, need to subtract away that maintenance cost. So our profit in a 12-unit apartment complex with rents of $500 a month and 10% vacancy, and maintenance expenditures of $40,000 will be $24,800 a year. But we want to make this model work a little bit better. So we want to introduce, based on our experience and some market research that we've done, what's going to happen if we have lower rent? What will happen to vacancy? And what if we have a higher rent? What will happen to vacancy? So based on all the great data that we've gathered in the past, we do have some information here. So let's go ahead and build a little table here of what we found out. So we have rents and vacancy. And let's say that we have determined that if the rents are anywhere between $0 and $400, let's say 0 and $400, that if the rent is anywhere between there, our vacancy rate is going to go down by 50%, minus 50%. Now you notice the way Excel works is that you're going to put your starting value in the first cell of this table, and if you have a value anywhere between these two values, it's going to step back and use this value. So it's not until we get to 400 or over that we're going to use the value that we have here. Let's say that if we are, as soon as we hit $400, that vacancy is going to now be reduced by 25%, minus 25%. And as soon as our rent hits $500, our vacancy is just the same as we would normally expect it to be. Let's just say it's going to be 0% change. So it doesn't change at all. That's kind of our normal kind of market rent is between $500 and $600. So let's say, go ahead and say $600. And so now if we get to that next point at $600, we're going to see our vacancy is going to drop dramatically. We're going to have a vacancy of 40%. So the market apparently is very, very sensitive. You go up that $100, as soon as you cross that $600 threshold, your vacancy is going to shoot through the roof. 4 out of 10 people of your apartment complex are going to either not move in or maybe move out. So you might want to be very careful setting rents at $600 or more. And it gets even worse. At a rent of $700, rent is going to cause vacancy to drop by 80%. Let's just say 80%. And let's say that if you hit the $800 mark, that rents are going to drop 90%. Okay. So if rent is anywhere between $0 and $400, okay, if we haven't hit that $400 mark yet, we're going to have a decrease in vacancy of 50%. Now, obviously, vacancy can't go below 0, and so we're going to there's going to be a natural limit there at 0 vacancy, and once rent hits 400, vacancy is going to be dropped by 25%. And when rents hit $500, vacancy will just kind of be 0%. You won't have any vacancy. You'll be full. And you know, in a normal situation. And then $600 vacancy increases by 40%. So this is kind of an adjustment factor. So rent, you're going to have a vacancy adjustment over here. If rents are set at a certain level, vacancy is actually going to be different. This number here is going to be a little bit different. And let's go ahead and build a similar table for our maintenance. Let's say maintenance levels obviously are going to be able to start at different amounts. Let's say that we can start at $0 here again and spend absolutely no money on maintenance. And let's say that the next level would be, let's say something like $35,000. and then let's say $45,000. I'm going to drag this down so that we get all the formatting correctly. 45,000, 70,000, and that's when we've hired maybe a couple of people, and now 90,000, and we've maybe hired 2.5 people, something like that, to work maintenance for us. All right, and so what is that going to do? How's that going to affect our vacancy? Let's say our vacancy is going to be at 0. Vacancy is going to be 75%. Where the place is in such bad shape that 3/4 of the people move out or just aren't even interested in living there. And let's say 45%, 20%, 0%. So if we're spending $70,000, that's kind of what people expect. It doesn't really have any impact on vacancy. And let's say that if we spend $90,000, the maintenance is so great that people are telling their friends, and vacancy actually goes down by 20%. Okay, so now we have these two tables of kind of ways that vacancy can change based on the amount of money we spend in rent and how much money we spend in maintenance. So how are we going to work these things in? So let's work it in as an adjustment factor to our vacancy. So our vacancy here, we just kind of plugged a number in at 10%. But let's go ahead and have vacancy change based on how we set rent and maintenance. So we'll just do like a new little formula here. Vacancy adjustment. And I'll go ahead and put an underline on this to make it look a little bit better so we can understand what we're doing here. And let's say that in the case of rent, we want to use this table right here to pull back a value. So whatever we have plugged in here, we want it to pull the correct value over here based on this column here. So there's a function in Excel called vertical lookup, which is what we use to do this. So equals VLOOKUP. And we're going to use a lookup table, a table array, column and a column index number. So the lookup, the lookup value is going to be the $500. And where do we want to? What table do we want to use to look that up? So we put our comma, and we're going to highlight our table here that we just created, and then we're going to press a comma. And which column from this table do we want it to spit back out over here? Well, we want it to spit out this second column here, not the first column. We want it to spit out the second column. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 2 there, and close that parentheses. And now we can see what happened. Well, I've got 500 and 0. We'll change that to a % so it matches up with what we have over there. And let's test this thing out. Let's say $200. All right, there we go. It's between 0 and 400. We get this minus 50, minus 50%. Let's try a different value. Let's say $705. If we set the rent at $705, our vacancy adjustment is exactly what it should be. It hasn't gotten to the 800 level yet, so we step back to this 700, and it's right there. And let's go ahead and we'll try that. We'll try $850. $850. Ooh, vacancy drops to 90%. It's so expensive nobody wants to live there. Maybe some crazy person would live there. 10% of the people will still live there if you just set some crazy rent. But and this is probably not completely accurate because your vacancy is only going to drop to 90% even if we set rent at $50,000 a month. So this isn't perfect, but it should work in most cases. Well, now we need to do the same thing with our maintenance. So I'm just going to use that same function, VLOOKUP, and our lookup value is going to be the amount here, this maintenance amount, and our little table that we're going to use is this guy over here. And if you remember, we're going to pull from the second column in this table again, so that's going to be column number 2. And I'm going to close it out there. And we need to go ahead and convert that to a percentage just so it's easier to look at. All right, so what we have is a situation here where we have a vacancy rate that is going to be 45%. Look right here, we have Maintenance is between the $35,000 and $45,000 level, which is really, really bad. It's not a lot of money to be spent on a big complex. So vacancy is going to be 45%. And over here, we have such high rent that we would normally expect it to be vacancy to be 90%. Well, vacancy can't go over 100%. So what are we going to do? So now we need to build a formula that's going to take advantage of these vacancy adjustment factors here. So let's see how we would do that. Well, the first thing we'll do is we'll just try a very simplified approach and see what happens. Let's say we just take our two vacancy adjustments and add them up. Well, we can't have vacancy that is greater than 1 or greater than 100%. So we need to use just one of our basic functions in Excel. We could use the function that is the minimum function, and we'll go ahead and just try that out for a second here just to teach you how to use that one. So we'll say min. So it's going to be the less of either 1 or that value I did earlier, C4 plus C5. So whichever one's less, it's going to go with that amount. Okay. So if it's such an expensive place and the maintenance is so bad that vacancy would be 100%, would be greater than 100%, that function min just sets it at 100. It's going to give us the minimum of these two values, the 1 or this plus this. So obviously 1 in this case is lower than that. Okay. Well, you may have by now figured out something else that could happen. Let's suppose that we had a situation where vacancy, where your rent was really, really low. Let's say we set rent for $200 a month, like we said earlier. And then we had maintenance was so great, we're spending $100,000. And now we have vacancy is negative 70%. Well, you can't have negative vacancy either. So we have to have a situation now where we can have it never be more than 100, but also never be less than 0. So how would we do that? Well, there's a lot of ways to do this, but one way that seems to work pretty well is just kind of think about what we want to have happen here. Well, if this value is less than 0, we just want to use 0. But if it's not less than 0, we can go ahead and leave it whatever it was, because we've already fixed it if it gets too high. So we'll just use that same logic in an Excel statement, an Excel function. So we'll just say if this value, so I'm going to say if in open parentheses, is less than 0, comma, and then now I'm going to put in there what I want to have happen if that last statement is true. If that value is less than 0, we just want to use 0. Otherwise, we just want to go ahead and use the value that it was already spitting out. So I'll just copy this formula that I just created. Control C, move over here and hit Control V. So if this value, in this case we had a second ago, is negative 70%, if this negative 70 is less than 0, we just want to use 0. And in this situation, it would use a 0. Otherwise, we want to go ahead and use what it had calculated, and then it'll work. So let's go ahead and close that parentheses out there, and we'll see if it gives us what we want. Hey, it worked! Okay, so now we have the minus 50 and minus 20 would give us minus 70, but that's below 0, so it spits out the 0. Let's go ahead and change it to something that would normally produce a value somewhere between 1 and 0. So let's get our rents at, let's say, $600. And that should give us a boost of 40. And if let's change our maintenance, let's make our maintenance kind of right at what market wants at 70,000. And that's going to have no impact on our vacancy. So it should add up. 40 plus 40 should be 40. It does. Now let's do a situation where we are so bad that vacancy would just be crazy high. So let's go ahead and make that 700 rent, and then the maintenance is really, really poor. Make it 35,000. And those add up to more than 100, so stops off at 100. So everything is working correctly. Vacancy is going to be calculated somewhere between 0 and 100 based on these kind of lookup tables that we've created. We can make these guys look good by put some underlines there. Okay, well now we have a nice little model here that we can change these values around and kind of see what the impact is on profits. And look at this, in this one we're actually losing money. And that makes sense because vacancy is 100%. Nobody's living in our place. We're collecting 0 rent, but we're having to pay this $35,000 a year in maintenance. That's not so smart to have a maintenance guy running around in a vacant place, but this is the decision that we've made. Well, what if we want to see a whole set of values that can give us an idea of how this might work and not have to go in here and change these values every few seconds? So let's see how we might be able to build a table that will automatically do all these calculations for us. So let's go ahead and build a table here that has maintenance across the top. And we're going to have over on the side over here, let's say that we put the rent on this side. And let's say that rent, we'll start it off at $300, and we'll just start building down here, and we'll do 400. I'll just copy this down here, and then we'll change that to a 400. And now when I highlight both of these and drag them, it'll go ahead and auto-populate, and we'll run that down to say $900. Okay, so now we have rent is 300 through 900, and we need to move this down one row here. There we go. And we'll put maintenance. And we needed to move that down so that we could have maintenance here and rent here and have a value here that corresponds to what your profit would be for that intersection. So let's say that we had maintenance level of $25,000 and we have maintenance of $35,000. And I'll go ahead and just we'll copy these out just to get the formatting down, and then maybe we will we'll make this 25, 35. We'll make this 40,000 and 45,000, maybe 70,000. We could make them even, kind of even it out, and 70,000, 100,000, and I think that's enough. So we'll just use these values here. And what we want to do is figure out, well, what's the profit going to be if we spent 500 and we spent 35,000? Now I could manually go here and calculate all these and just populate these values, but there's a better way. Of course there's a better way. And one thing that's nice to do is go ahead and pretty things up a little bit, because usually we're doing things like this to show somebody else. So one of the things that we need to do in Excel to kind of move to our next step to do this kind of what-if analysis is when we're building a table like this, we need to put the value that we want to show up in each of these cells. We need to go ahead and put the formula, the output formula that we want to show up there in this cell right here in the corner. So we have this region right here of our maintenance variables and this region here of our rent variables, and we want our profit variable to be here. I kind of like it up there, so I'm just going to make a cell reference to it. I'm going to say equals and point to my $35,000 value right there. Alright, and now comes the fun part. Now we're going to use a data table. So we're going to highlight, starting with that cell up there, and highlight this whole area. And now we're going to use a function called what if analysis, and it's data table. Now if you click on the what if analysis button, and if you have your full screen set up, it'll probably even say what if analysis underneath this icon, but it's got the question mark. And if I go to data table, the data table function is going to bring up a nifty little menu here. So all we're going to do now is tell it where we want it to get these values from. For our row input cell, we have this row right here of maintenance. This row, so row input cell goes with this row of maintenance items. So I'm just going to click on our maintenance variable up here. I'm going to move my cursor down here to my column input cell. So we have this column of data right here, this column of rents. So I'm going to click on my rent value. And now I'm just going to simply click OK. And voila! We have a full table completely built of all the values that we want. Well, where's the maximum value in there? Well, you can kind of scan around and see it. No, it looks like maybe 59,000 over here. Looks like we're charging 700. Oh no, that's a negative number. That's not good. Let's see here. Where's our highest positive value? Looks like maybe it's here. 11,000. You know what? An easier way to do that. Let's just do this. Let's use our Excel functions, and we'll just say, just like we did minimum earlier, let's say maximum. Let's say maximum, and we're going to just highlight all these cells. Alright, so our maximum profit is going to be 12,600. So I just did a max on this entire region here, 12,600. There we go, $12,600. Now another really cool thing that you can do to make this better from a visual standpoint is use conditional formatting. So let's take a look at how to do that. First thing we're going to do is highlight these cells, and then we are going to go into our conditional formatting. And we're going to find our conditional formatting on the home menu under Styles. Now again, if you have your full menu shown up, you're probably going to see the conditional formatting on there, and it's going to look like this. It's a button that's got a box, and it's got some greater than, equal symbols, and some red and blue. So we're just going to click on conditional formatting, and I like to use, a lot of times I'll use the color scales area, and I'm just going to select here. This is going to give me green as being positive, and it's going to make red negative. Yeah, that's pretty good. So let's see what we got here now. Now if I take a look, it's automatically looked at all my values and set ranges for positive and negative values. Now you can see here, now I can quickly find these amounts here, those 12,600. They're going to be the kind of the darkest green and my biggest losers. So I definitely don't want to set maintenance at $100,000 and have my rent so high nobody lives here, hardly anybody lives there. Maintenance is going to help me a little bit, but I'm still losing a boatload of money in a situation like that. And where the power of this really comes in is anytime I change one of these values in these rows, if I decide I want a model instead of 70,000, I can say 90,000. It's going to redo my table. I could take that back to $100,000, and I can also change these probabilities up here, or these vacancy rates as they change around. So I might say, you know, this is probably going to be more like 50,000, where it's going to make that, oops, not 5,000, 50,000. Now it is important to note that these do need to be in sequence. So you have to have 0, 35, they have to get larger in order for this to work correctly, because it's going to work up these values and step back to the previous one if it doesn't bump up against it. So, and now we could also change, let's say $50,000 is kind of the market expectation, and let's make that a 0%, and let's make this a negative 10%. Vacancy drops as you spend that much money. But let's say that going from 50 to 35,000 really doesn't hurt vacancy quite as much. It only has maybe a 30% increase in vacancy that happens when you do that. And you can see now that my profit number moves around. You can see my maximum, my kind of ideal setting scenario for this complex is set rent at $400 and set my maintenance at $35,000. That's going to be my kind of optimal setting for this. So, and it's not always going to be where vacancy is 0 at a particular amount. In this one we have vacancy, kind of the rent level that has 0 vacancy is $500, and that's kind of down in this row here, and $50,000. So if you just say, hey, well, I know that $50,000 is going to be kind of my optimal maintenance level and $500 rent, you're going to be somewhere in this range right here, and that's going to be a really bad decision because you're not really taking into account how these things work together. So, so go ahead and back the video up, get Excel going if you haven't already been doing this, And go ahead and follow this process and make a few changes here. See what happens. Take some time to understand how this could be used not just in a real estate context, but in lots of decision making. This is very basic, very, very simplistic, and there are some amazingly cool statistical techniques that can also tell you a distribution of how these things will work, and also allow you not to build not only just a table like this, but also to make these follow a curve, a linear, or some other sort of function. Maybe it's an exponential function or a log function that says, well, vacancy is going to drop up, but it's not going to drop to 0, and it's not going to drop at the same rate. It's not going to be a straight line. You may also introduce random variables that say, well, what is my competitor going to do, and what's the chances of if they raise their rents, what's that going to do to my rent, and what are they going to do next year? Well, I think they're going to do this. So you may be able to throw some random variables in there too, and then run all this as a model to see what your range of possible profitabilities are for the upcoming period. What's the chances that you go bankrupt, that you can't even pay your mortgage? So it can get really cool and really exciting as you kind of expand your knowledge around these techniques of both optimization and moving into sensitivity analysis and simulation. All right, well, hopefully this has helped and got you started on this topic, and stay tuned for more exciting real estate modeling videos.